There is a plain brown casserole dish sitting in your cabinet right now, and for 50 years you were told it was just something grandma cooked in. A dealer would love for you to keep believing that, because a handful of these ordinary-looking dishes quietly sell for hundreds, and the rarest ones cross 1,000. Here is the truth almost nobody says out loud. Corning made this cookware for over 40 years, in the hundreds of millions. So simply owning a piece makes you ordinary. What decides the value is the pattern, the shape, and whether you kept the lid. You have seen the headlines screaming that your dish is worth $5,000. I respect you too much to inflate that. Most of what is in your cabinet sells for lunch money, but the right few, hiding in plain sight, quietly pay real money. I have spent years walking through estate sales, watching families price a whole kitchen's worth of memories in about 10 minutes flat, because nobody ever showed them what to actually look for. That is the entire idea behind this list. Not hype, not a wild number designed to make you click, just the honest range a piece really brings. And the one small check that tells you which side of that range you are standing on. And the one nearly every American kitchen owns is waiting at number 1. Number 10 is wheat. A simple ring of golden wheat stalks circling the rim on plain white. Nobody's grandmother thought twice about it, because Corning made this pattern from 1979 all the way to 2001, longer than almost anything else they ever produced. That long run is exactly why it means so little. Wheat is everywhere, which is precisely why the honest number is $8 to $25 for most pieces, no matter what a listing site promises you. Here is the part that actually matters. Turn the dish over. If the back stamp says CorningWare in 2 words with an older style logo, you are holding a piece from the earlier, shorter, first run before 1985. And those early ones can double the low end of that range. Most people never flip the dish over. They just see wheat, assume common, and box it for goodwill. There is a second detail almost nobody checks, and it is the shape rather than the pattern. Wheat was produced in nearly every shape Corning ever made, from tiny individual bakers to the large oval roasters, and the oval roaster with its domed lid is the one shape that quietly outsells everything else in this pattern. Number 9. Callaway ivy. Deep green trailing ivy leaves wrapped around the sides, a pattern people mistake for a cheap knockoff because it looks almost too pretty for old Corningware. That instinct is understandable, and it is wrong. Callaway ivy was a shorter production run, mostly through the mid-1970s, and clean examples with the lid intact land between $30 and $90. Here is what the resale sites never mention. The ivy pattern was applied by hand transfer in these early years, and pieces where the green has not faded to grey-green carry the real premium. Hold the dish under a bright lamp. If the ivy still reads as a true forest green, you are looking at a piece that was rarely used and never left in direct sun on a windowsill for 20 years. That is the piece worth listing. I have watched a faded ivy bowl sell for $8 at the same sale, where a vivid one 10 feet away brought 60. One more thing worth remembering. Callaway ivy is easy to mistake for a modern reproduction, since the trailing leaf design has been copied by other brands over the decades. If the glass feels unusually light or has a bluish tint instead of Corning's milky white, check the back stamp before you get your hopes up. Number 8. Symphony. Grey and blue geometric bands, almost minimalist, from the early 1980s. People walk right past this one because it does not look like the flowery Corningware they remember from their childhood kitchen. That is exactly the mistake. Symphony was a shorter-lived pattern aimed at a more modern, design-conscious buyer at the time, and it simply did not sell as well as the florals, which means fewer survived the decade. A clean symphony casserole with its lid runs $40 to $100 depending on size. Here is your test. Check the inside for the fine grey webbing of utensil scratches, the same damage that ruins any piece. But on Symphony specifically, because the pattern already reads as grey and blue, scratching is easy to miss with the naked eye. Run your thumb across it instead of just looking. If you feel ridges, the piece has been worked hard with metal forks for years, and that quietly cuts the price in half. Symphony also came with a matching plastic storage lid alongside the glass baking lid, and collectors hunt for both together. If you find a piece with two different lids stacked in the cabinet, don't assume the plastic one is a cheap add-on. A matched pair sells for noticeably more than the casserole alone. Number 7. But before we climb into the top 7, there is something almost nobody realizes about a valuable dish. It is never the picture on the front that sets the price. Two identical-looking casseroles can sell $40 apart, and the reason is always in the details most people never think to check. The exact wording stamped on the bottom, the narrow window of years a pattern was actually made, whether the original lid survived, and the difference between an asking price someone typed on a website and a price a real buyer actually paid. If you have overlooked this your whole life, that is not carelessness. Nobody ever sat you down and taught you to look this way. That is exactly why I put together a short guide that walks you through the back stamps, the date codes, and the honest way to tell what a piece truly sells for, so you can read your own cupboard the way a dealer reads it across the table. It is linked right below this video if you want it. Now, back to the countdown. Number 7. Buffet. Bold brown and burnt orange geometric shapes on white, from the 1960s, the kind of pattern people either love or immediately call ugly. Fair reaction. And also, the exact reason it is worth checking. Buffet had a shorter production window than the florals that came after it, and far fewer pieces survived because the pattern fell out of style so fast that plenty got tossed in the 1970s. A buffet casserole in good shape runs $60 to $150, sometimes more for the larger sizes. Here is the human detail that gives it away. Because the geometric pattern sits slightly raised on the surface, just like the sculpted florals of the era, the edges wear first. Tilt the dish toward a window instead of staring straight down at it. Crisp, sharp edges on the shapes mean a piece that spent more time in a cabinet than on a stovetop. Soft, blurred edges mean decades of dishwater did the damage. I have seen a mint buffet casserole passed over at a garage sale for $2 because the seller assumed anything that looked like the 1960s was automatically less valuable than the flowers that came later. It was backwards. Buffet also has a companion candle warmer stand, a metal cradle meant to keep the dish warm at the table, and most were thrown out decades ago because nobody knew what the strange metal frame was for. If you still have that stand, keep it together with the dish. A complete warming set is worth meaningfully more than the casserole alone. Number 6. Snowflake blue. Pale blue snowflakes scattered across white, a pattern so understated it barely registers as a pattern at all. Reasonable reaction and wrong. What almost nobody knows is how briefly this one existed. Snowflake blue had one of the shortest runs of any mainstream CorningWare pattern, produced for only a handful of years in the mid-1000s, 970 seconds, before it was quietly discontinued. That short window is the entire story, and it puts honest, complete pieces at $50 to $130. Here is what to do the moment it is in your hands. Read the pattern name if it is printed anywhere on the piece, then check the back stamp for the older two-word CorningWare mark, with Made in USA underneath, because a pattern this short-lived is almost always the earlier American-made run, rather than a later reissue. A short-run pattern with its lid still attached is where the real number actually lives. I have watched this exact dish get grouped into a dollar box at an estate sale, sold off by the armful, because nobody clocked how brief the window really was. What makes snowflake blue tricky is that the pale color fades almost invisibly under normal light, so two pieces that look identical can be years apart in wear. Hold them under direct sunlight and compare the snowflakes side by side. The one with crisp, distinct edges is the one worth photographing first when you sell. Number 5. Now the mood shifts. The next 4 are the ones that make people genuinely uneasy once they understand them, because the odds are highest that one of these is already sitting in your house right now. Number 5. Shenandoah. Soft blue tulips and leaves on white. A quiet, almost forgettable early 1970s pattern that most people confuse for one of the more common florals. That plain surface is hiding a fact that changes the price. Shenandoah had a limited regional distribution when it was first sold, meaning far fewer pieces made it into kitchens outside certain markets. And that scarcity is the whole reason a 5-quart Shenandoah casserole with its matching lid brings $80 to $140, while the smaller sizes land closer to $30. Here is your test tonight. This one lives and dies by the lid, exactly the way the rarer florals do. Set the cover on and check for a flush seal with no chips along the rim. Lid present, you are near the top of that range. Lid gone, you have lost more than half. I have watched the same dish sell for $110 one week and $20 the next, and the only difference between them was a missing piece of glass. Because Shenandoah was distributed regionally rather than sold nationwide, where you are sitting right now actually matters more than it does with most patterns on this list. A piece that turns up constantly at estate sales in one part of the country can be genuinely hard to find in another, and buyers in those scarce regions will pay a real premium just to complete a set without having to ship one across the country. If you know your family bought this dish locally decades ago and never moved, that history alone is worth mentioning when you list it. Number 4. Zodiac. 12 astrological symbols circling the dish in gold script. A genuinely strange pattern that most people assume is a novelty item from a flea market rather than real CorningWare. This is where the whole video turns. A single, loose zodiac piece is uncommon on its own, running $70 to $150 depending on condition. But a complete zodiac set with every lid, boxed and unused, has been documented selling for $500 to $900. Because this pattern was produced in far smaller numbers than the everyday florals and was never a mainstream bestseller. Here is what nobody tells you about CorningWare. The unusual offbeat patterns that never sold well when they were new are often the ones worth the most now, precisely because so few survived 4 decades of donation bins and yard sales. So, go look at the strange forgotten dish in the back of the cabinet. The one that never matched anything else you owned, because it may be the reason this whole list exists. One more thing about Zodiac that trips people up. Because the design is gold script rather than a painted floral, it was more prone to fading in the dishwasher than the pattern on almost any other piece on this list. And a dish where the zodiac symbols have worn down to faint ghost outlines is worth a fraction of one, where the gold still reads clearly. Before you get excited about a listing price, check whether you can still read all 12 symbols without squinting. If you cannot, adjust your expectations toward the bottom of that range, not the top. Number 3. The Bicentennial Eagle. A patriotic spreadwing eagle in red, white, and blue, produced only around 1976 to mark the country's 200th birthday. For years, people treated it as a novelty souvenir, rather than a real collectible, something you'd find at a flea market next to old license plates. But those short production windows are precisely where the money hides. Because this piece was only made for a single anniversary year, genuine examples with the correct period backstamp have been listed as high as $300. And the rarer, larger casserole sizes have climbed higher still in specialist collector circles. Now, I have to be honest with you, the way a real dealer would. Those higher numbers are often asking prices on collector sites, not confirmed sold records. So before you get excited, look up what one actually sold for recently, not what a hopeful seller is asking today. Read the piece for the correct 1976 dating on the bottom, then check recently completed listings instead of active ones. Because this pattern was tied to a single celebratory year, rather than sold as an everyday kitchen staple, plenty of examples spent decades stored away in a box, rather than used at the stove. Which oddly works in your favor. A stored piece that never touched a metal fork or a scouring pad often survives in far better condition than a common floral that was in weekly rotation for 20 years. If your bicentennial eagle piece has been sitting untouched in a hutch or a hope chest rather than a kitchen cabinet, that is exactly the kind of survival story a serious collector wants to hear. Number 2. French white. Plain, unadorned white cookware with no pattern at all. The kind of piece people assume has zero collector value because there is nothing decorative to photograph. Here is where I owe you the plain truth, because this is the pattern the hype sites get most wrong in both directions. Basic later French white pieces, the kind still sold in stores in various forms for years, are genuinely worth very little, often just $10 to $20. But the earliest French white pieces, made before the pattern was simplified and mass-produced, in the harder-to-find shapes like the tall skillet or the covered pie plate, quietly bring $80 to $200 among collectors who specifically chase the plain early pieces because almost nobody else wanted them at the time. Make sure it is an early shape, not the modern reissue still found in some kitchen stores today, because those look almost identical and are worth almost nothing. The way to tell them apart without a magnifying glass is weight and thickness. The early French white pieces were made from the same dense pyroceram as the patterned CorningWare from the same era, so they feel noticeably heavier and thicker at the rim than the thinner, lighter reissues sold decades later under the same plain white look. Pick the dish up in one hand. If it feels almost too heavy for its size, you are likely holding the older, more valuable version, not the modern one sitting on store shelves today. And now the one you have been waiting for. The pattern nearly every American kitchen has owned at some point. Number 1. Blue cornflower. That single blue flower, on plain white, is the most produced piece of cookware in American history. Corning made it for 3 decades, from 1958 to 1988, and it became the visual signature of the entire company. It started almost by accident. A Corning scientist named Don Stuckey left a piece of glass in a furnace that overheated far past its intended temperature, and instead of ruining the batch, it produced a milky white material so tough it would not shatter when dropped. That material was originally developed for missile nose cones before a designer put a small blue cornflower on it and sent it into your grandmother's kitchen. Now, here is the lesson that reframes every single piece before it on this list. Because blue cornflower is so common, most of it is genuinely worth only $10 to $40, and a standard casserole often sells for around $15 or $20. I will not pretend your everyday dish is a jackpot. It usually is not. But the value in this pattern was never really about the flour. It was always about the same 4 things you can check tonight, on any piece in your kitchen. Flip it over and read the backstamp. The older 2-word CorningWare mark with Made in USA is the one worth more than a later reissue. Find the lid. because a bare dish is worth a fraction of a complete one. Run your hand across the inside for scratches and cloudy wear, and never trust an asking price. Look only at what a piece has actually recently sold for. Do that, and the same 4 rules that apply to blue cornflour just unlocked every other pattern on this list. This cookware fed 2 generations before anyone thought to ask what it was really worth. The least it can do now is tell you the truth. So, tonight, before you box up a single dish for the donation bin, before you let anyone tell you it is just old kitchen junk, go open that cabinet you have not really looked into in years. Turn every piece over, read every backstamp, hunt down every lid you may have separated it from years ago. The dealer at the estate sale is counting on you not doing exactly that, on you being too tired or too certain it is worthless to spend 10 minutes with a lamp and your phone. That 10 minutes is the entire difference between a stranger's offer and what the piece is actually worth.